we'll go back to the Girard thing, then we'll come back here. Why are we neotenous? Why are we embryonic for so long? Because did we just move from the savannah to the Arctic and we need to learn new stuff? If we came genetically programmed, we would not be able to do that. Are we throwing spears, or are we fishing, or are we running an industrial supply chain, or are we texting? What is the adaptive behavior? Horses today in the wild and horses 10,000 years ago are doing pretty much the same stuff. And so since we make tools and we evolve our tools and then change our environment so quickly, and other animals are largely the result of their environment, but we're environment modifying so rapidly, we need to come without too much programming so we can learn the environment we're in, learn the language, right? Which is going to be very important. Learn the tool making, and so we have a very long period of relative helplessness because we aren't coded how to behave yet, because we're imprinting a lot of software on how to behave that is useful to that particular time. So our mimesis it's not unique to humans, but the total amount of it is really unique. And this is also where the uniqueness can go up, right? Is because we are less just the result of the genetics, and that means the kind of learning through history that got coded in genetics, and more the result of, it's almost like our hardware selected for software, right? Like if evolution is kind of doing these, think of as a hardware selection. I have problems with computer metaphors for biology, but I'll use this one here. That we have not had hardware changes since the beginning of Sapiens, but our world is really, really different. And that's all changes in software, right? Changes on the same fundamental genetic substrate, what we're doing with these brains and minds and bodies and social groups and like that. And so now Girard specifically was looking at when we watch other people talking, so we learn language. You and I would have a hard time learning Mandarin today, or it would take a lot of work. We'd be learning how to conjugate verbs and stuff. But a baby learns it instantly without anyone even really trying to teach it, just through mimesis. So it's a powerful thing. They're obviously more neuroplastic than we are when they're doing that, and all their attention's allocated to that. But they're also learning how to move their bodies, and they're learning all kinds of stuff through mimesis. One of the things that Girard says is they're also learning what to want. And they learn what to want. They learn desire by watching what other people want. And so intrinsic to this, people end up wanting what other people want. And if we can't have what other people have without taking it away from them, then that becomes a source of conflict. So the mimesis of desire is the fundamental generator of conflict. And that then the conflict energy within a group of people will build over time. This is a very, very crude interpretation of the theory.
Can we just pause on that? For people who are not familiar, and for me who hasn't, I'm loosely familiar but haven't internalized it, but every time I think about it, it's a very compelling view of the world, whether it's true or not. It's like when you take everything Freud says as truth, it's a very interesting way to think about the world. And in the same way, thinking about the Memetic theory of desire, that everything we want is imitation of other people's wants. We don't have any original wants. We're constantly imitating others. And so, and not just others, but, others we're exposed to. So there's these like little local pockets, however defined local, of people like imitating each other. And one that's super empowering, because then you can pick which group you can join. Like, what do you want to imitate? It's the old, like, whoever your friends are, that's what your life is going to be like. That's really powerful. I mean, it's depressing that we're so unoriginal, but it's also liberating in that if this holds true, that we can choose our life by choosing the people we hang out with.
So, okay. Thoughts that are very compelling, that seem like they're more absolute than they actually are, end up also being dangerous. We want
communism.
I'm going to discuss here where I think we need to amend this particular theory. But specifically, you just said something that everyone who's paid attention knows is true experientially, which is who you're around affects who you become. And as libertarian and self-determining and sovereign as we'd like to be, everybody, I think, knows that if you got put in a maximum security prison, aspects of your personality would have to adapt, or you wouldn't survive there, right? You would become different. If you grew up in Darfur versus Finland, you would be different with your same genetics. Like, just there's no real question about that. And that even today, if you hang out in a place with ultra marathoners as your roommates, or all people who are obese as your roommates, the statistical likelihood of what happens to your fitness is pretty clear, right? Like, the behavioral science of this is pretty clear. So the whole saying, we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time around. Mm-hmm. I think the more self-reflective someone is and the more time they spend by themselves in self-reflection, the less this is true, but it's still true. So one of the best things someone can do to become more self-determined is be self-determined about the environments they want to put themselves in. Because to the degree that there is some self-determination and some determination by the environment, don't be fighting an environment that is predisposing you in bad directions. Try to put yourself in an environment that is predisposing the things that you want. In turn, try to affect the environment in ways that predispose positive things for those around you.
Or perhaps also choose, there's probably interesting ways to play with this. You could probably put yourself, like, form connections that have this perfect tension in all directions to where you're actually free to decide whatever the heck you want, because the set of wants within your circle of interactions is so conflicting that you're free to choose whichever one. So if there's enough tension, as opposed to everybody aligned like a flock of birds.
Yeah, you definitely want that all of the dialectics would be balanced. So if you have someone who is extremely oriented to self-empowerment and someone who's extremely oriented to kind of empathy and compassion, both, the dialectic of those is better than either of them on their own. If you have both of them being inhabited better than you by the same person, spending time around that person will probably do well for you. Yeah. I think the thing you just mentioned is super important when it comes to cognitive schools, which is, I think, one of the fastest things people can do to improve their learning, and their not just cognitive learning, but their meaningful problem-solving, communication, and civic capacity to participate as a citizen with other people in making the world better, is to be seeking dialectical synthesis all the time. And so in the Hegelian sense, if you have a thesis, you have an antithesis. So maybe we have libertarianism on one side and Marxist kind of communism on the other side. And one is arguing that the individual is the unit of choice. And so we want to increase the freedom and support of individual choice, because as they make more agentic choices, it'll produce a better whole for everybody. The other side saying, well, the individuals are conditioned by their environment. Who would choose to be born into Darfur rather than Finland? So we actually need to collectively make environments that are good, because that the environment conditions the individuals. So you have a thesis and an antithesis. And then Hegel's idea is you have a synthesis, which is a kind of higher order truth that understands how those relate in a way that neither of them do. And so it is actually at a higher order of complexity. So the first part would be, can I steel man each of these? Can I argue each one well enough that the proponents of it are like, totally, you got that? And not just argue it rhetorically, but can I inhabit it where I can try to see and feel the world the way someone seeing and feeling the world that way would? Because once I do, then I don't want to screw those people, because there's truth in it, right? And I'm not going to go back to war with them. I'm going to go to finding solutions that could actually work at a higher order. If I don't go to a higher order, then there's war. But then the higher order thing would be, well, it seems like the individual does affect the commons and the collective and other people. It also seems like the collective conditions individuals, at least statistically. And I can cherry pick out the one guy who got out of the ghetto and pulled himself up by his bootstraps. But I can also say statistically that most people born into the ghetto show up differently than most people born into the Hamptons. And so unless you want to argue that and take your child from the Hamptons and put him in the ghetto, then, like, come on, be realistic about this thing. So how do we don't want social systems that make weak, dependent individuals, right? The welfare argument, but we also don't want no social system that supports individuals to do better. We don't want individuals where their self-expression and agency fucks the environment and everybody else and employs slave labor and whatever. So can we make it to where individuals are creating wholes that are better for conditioning other individuals? Can we make it to where we have wholes that are conditioning increased agency and sovereignty, right? That would be the synthesis. So the thing that I'm coming to here is, if people have that as a frame, and sometimes it's not just thesis and antithesis, it's like 8 different views, right? Can I steelman each view? And this is not just can I take the perspective, but am I seeking them? Am I actively trying to inhabit other people's perspective? Then can I really try to essentialize it and argue the best points of it, both the sense making about reality and the values, why these values actually matter. Then, just like I want to seek those perspectives, then I want to seek, is there a higher order set of understandings that could fulfill the values of and synthesize the sense making of all of them simultaneously? Maybe I won't get it, but I want to be seeking it, and I want to be seeking progressively better ones. So this is perspective seeking, driving perspective taking, and then seeking synthesis. I think that one cognitive disposition might be the most helpful thing.
Would you put a title of dialectic synthesis on that process? Because that seems to be such a part. So like this rigorous empathy, like it's not just empathy, it's empathy with rigor. Like you really want to understand and embody different worldviews and then try to find a higher order synthesis.
Okay, so I remember last night you told me when we first met, you said that you looked in somebody's eyes and you felt that you had suffered in some ways that they had suffered, and so you could trust them.
Sure.
Shared pathos, right, creates a certain sense of kind of shared bonding and shared intimacy. So empathy is actually feeling the suffering of somebody else and feeling the depth of their sentience. Well, I don't want to fuck them anymore, right? I mean, I hurt them. I don't want to behave I don't want my proposition to go through when I go and inhabit the perspective of the other people if they feel that's really going to mess them up, right? And so the rigorous empathy, it's different than just compassion, which is I generally care. Like I have a generalized care, but I don't know what it's like to be them. I can never know what it's like to be them perfectly. And that there's a humility you have to have, which is my most rigorous attempt is still not it. My most rigorous attempt, mine, to know what it's like to be a woman is still not it. I have no question that if I was actually a woman, it would be different than my best guesses. I have no question that if I was actually black, it'd be different than my best guesses. So there's a humility in that which keeps me listening because I don't think that I know fully, but I want to, and I'm going to keep trying better to. And then I want to across them, and then I want to say, is there a way we can forward together and not have to be in war? It has to be something that could meet the values that everyone holds, that could reconcile the partial sense-making that everyone holds, and that could offer a way forward that is more agreeable than the partial perspectives at war with each other.
But the more you succeed at this empathy with humility, the more you're carrying the burden of other people's pain, essentially.
Now this goes back to the question of, do I see us as one being or 7.8 billion? Yeah. I think if I'm overwhelmed with my own pain, I can't empathize that much because I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the capacity. If I don't feel like I can do something about a particular problem in the world, it's hard to feel it because it's just too devastating. And so a lot of people go numb and even go nihilistic because they just don't feel the agency. So as I actually become more empowered as an individual and have more sense of agency, I also become more empowered to be more empathetic for others and be more connected to that shared burden and want to be able to make choices on behalf of and in benefit of.
So this way of living seems like a way of living that would solve a lot of problems in society from a cellular automata perspective. So if you have a bunch of little agents behaving in this way, my intuition, there'll be interesting complexities that emerge, but my intuition is it will create a society that's very different and recognizably better than the one we have today. How much,
Oh, wait. Hold that question because I want to come back to it, but this brings us back to Gerard, which we didn't answer. The conflict theory.
Yes.
Because about how to get past the conflict theory.
Yes. You know the Robert Frost poem about the two paths, and you never have enough time to return back to the other? We're going to have to do that quite a lot. We're going to be living that poem over and over again. But yes, how to, let's return back.
Okay, so the rest of the argument goes, you learn to want what other people want, therefore fundamental conflict based in our desire because we want the thing that somebody else has. And then people are they're in conflict over trying to get the same stuff, power, status, attention, physical stuff, a mate, whatever it is. And then we learn the conflict by watching. And so then the conflict becomes mimetic. We become on the Palestinian side or the Israeli side or the communist or capitalist side or the left or right politically or whatever it is. And until eventually the conflict energy in the system builds up so much that some type of violence is needed to get the bad guy, whoever it is that we're going to blame. And, Girard talks about why scapegoating was kind of a mechanism to minimize the amount of violence. Let's blame a scapegoat as being more relevant than they really were. But if we all believe it, then we can all kind of calm down with the conflict energy.
It's a really interesting concept, by the way. I mean, you beautifully summarized it, but the idea that there's a scapegoat, that there's this kind of thing naturally leads to a conflict, and then they find the other, some group that's the other, that's either real or artificial as the cause of the conflict. And
well, it's always artificial because the cause of the conflict in Girard is the mimesis of desire itself. And how do we attack that? How do we attack that it's our own desire? So this now gets to something more like Buddha said, right? Which was desire is the cause of suffering. Girard and Buddha would kind of agree in this way.
But that explains, I mean, again, it's a compelling description of human history that we do tend to come up with the other. And
okay, kind of. I just had such a funny experience with someone critiquing Girard the other day in such a elegant and beautiful and simple way. It's a friend who's grew up Aboriginal Australian, is a scholar of Aboriginal social technologies, and he's like, "Nah, man, Girard just made shit up about how tribes work. Like, we come from a tribe. We've got tens of thousands of years, and we didn't have increasing conflict and then scapegoat and kill someone. We'd have a little bit of conflict, and then we would dance, and then everybody'd be fine. Like, we'd dance around the campfire. Everyone would like kind of physically get the energy out. We'd look in each other's eyes. We'd have positive bonding, and then we're fine. And no scapegoats." And
I think that's called the Joe Rogan theory of desire, which is he's like all of human problems have to do with the fact that you don't do enough hard shit in your day. So maybe you could just dance it, because he says like doing exercise and running on the treadmill gets all the demons out, and maybe just dancing gets all the demons out.
so this is why I say we have to be careful with taking an idea that seems too explanatory and then taking it as a given and then saying, well, now that we're stuck with the fact that conflict is inexorable because mimetic desire, and therefore how do we deal with the inexorability of the conflict and how to sublimate violence? Well, no, the whole thing might be actually gibberish, meaning it's only true in certain conditions and other conditions it's not true. So the deeper question is, under which conditions is that true? Under which conditions is it not true? What do those other conditions make possible and look like?
And in general, we should stay away from really compelling models of reality, because there's something about our brains that these models become sticky and we can't even think outside of them. So
it's not that we stay away from them, it's that we know that the model of reality is never reality. That's the key thing.
Humility, again, it goes back to just having the humility that you don't have a perfect model of reality.
There's the model of reality could never be reality. The process of modeling is inherently information reduction. And I can never show that the unknown set has been factored.
It's back to the cellular automata. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Like when you realize it's unfortunately, sadly, impossible to create a model of cellular automata, even if you know the basic rules that predict to even any degree of accuracy how that system will evolve, which is fascinating mathematically. Sorry, I think about it quite a lot. It's very annoying. Wolfram has this rule 30. Like, you should be able to predict it. It's so simple, but you can't predict what's going to be. Like, there's a problem he defines. Like, try to predict some aspect of the middle column of the system, just anything about it, what's going to happen in the future, and you can't. It sucks, because then we can't make sense of this world of reality in a definitive way. It's always like in the striving, we're always striving.
Yeah, I don't think this sucks.
So that's a feature, not a bug.
Well, that's assuming a designer. I would say I don't think it sucks. I think it's not only beautiful, but maybe necessary for beauty.